So here is latent transition analysis, and that's essentially simply latent class analysis going longitudinal. Latent class analysis in a longitudinal setting, in this case with 2 time points only. So 4 items, the same 4 items administered, say, in fall of first grade and in spring of first grade. So this is a way you could study, for instance, the 13 aggression items at 2 time points. And you can have as many time points as you want. The main feature here, relative to yesterday, is that we're talking about an autoregressive model. You know, we had that as an alternative to the growth model, where we said that the outcome at time 2 is related to the outcome at time 1 directly. You will regress y2 on y1 and y3 on y2. And that's not what we do in growth modeling. But in many applications, that kind of a model would be more relevant. Here, we do that kind of autoregressive model, but on the latent level. So latent class variable at time 2 regressed on a latent class variable at time 1. So for instance, if you have two classes, low aggressive and a high aggressive student, you have low aggressive, high aggressive here, say. This is then the time 1 latent class variable, 2 classes behind these indicators of aggressive behavior. Then you're interested in seeing the probability for a low aggressive person to stay low aggressive at time 2. And you have a probability 0.8 for that person to stay low aggressive, probability 0.2 for the person to go from low aggressive to high aggressive. So you're talking about transitions. Transitions between states are often of interest in research. Here, the high aggressive person going to, staying at the high aggressive is 0.6, and going down to low aggressive is 0.4, perhaps as an, influenced by an intervention. So here, every row sums up to probability 1, so it's a conditional probability. This is called a transition probability matrix. So now you know what a matrix is, for those of you who didn't. So this is then, if you have this situation, a measurement instrument given more than once, what you would do then is start off with the latent class analysis for each time point, exploratory, determine the number of classes, do it at every time point, and then see, do you get the same number of classes at the different time points? And if so, do they seem to be measured the same way? Measurement invariance question again. And that is, do the profiles look pretty much the same across time? And those profiles that we showed, you know, the lines for the ADHD kids, they can be plotted in Mplus, and you can compare. So you want the item profiles, the item probabilities to be the same across time, at least if you're going to pretend that you have the same type of latent classes across time. In which case these transitions have a special meaning. So you do tend to want to have measurement invariance, but it's not necessary. You could certainly have situations where you start out with 2 classes here, and then that expands into 3 classes, an age differentiation situation. And then the interpretation will be a little bit more intriguing here in the transition probability case. But it's not necessarily the case that you have to force yourself into measurement invariance. You can even have a different number of classes. So if you look at this model formally, this is a measurement model. You know how latent variables are measured by observed variables. Here we choose a latent class model. Here we choose a latent class variable also. And this is standard LCA, logistic regressions essentially going on. And then you have C2 on C1. What's that? Well, if you have 2 latent classes, that's logistic regression as well, or multinomial logistic regression with more than 2 classes. And in this case, C1 is influenced by a covariate, and C2 is influenced not only by the previous class membership, but also directly by the covariate. So in the user's guide, you have several versions of this model explicated and exemplified. And on the website, you have several papers now under the paper section, which you find in the left margin. And if you go in and look under topics, we have the latent transition analysis topic. And there are a couple of papers there now. One is actually a dissertation by a former student of mine, Karen Nyland. Her dissertation is located there, and she tried to give a pedagogical overview of the steps of a latent transition analysis that you may want to go through for data having to do with bullying in schools and the transitions between victimization classes across time. So you may be interested in taking a look at that. And in the education setting, there's a paper by David Kaplan, a former student of mine, who did a paper in the context of achievement development, going through stages of achievement development where you would never, this probability would be 0 if you're high achieving or understanding a topic well at time 1. You specify your model so that you can only stay at the same level or go up, not go down. So you can impose these 0 transition probabilities as part of the modeling, and he shows how to do that in Mplus. And that's a paper that's coming out in developmental psychology. Actually, it's supposed to be a special issue of developmental psychology devoted to longitudinal methodology, and particularly latent transition analysis, I think. But I haven't heard more about that. Does anybody know about that issue? No. Now, today is supposed to be 2 levels, so we have to jazz it up a little bit. And in this case, on the left, we drop X for simplicity. And let's have it on both screens. This is work that's forthcoming in a book that you might be interested in. If you're interested in mixture modeling, I think it was last year in May at the University of Maryland that Greg Hancock and Karen Samuelson put together a nice 3-day meeting, a conference, with various speakers covering behavioral and educational topics, and all of them being mixture modeling. And Timur Asparojo from Mplus and I came, and he took the lead in a paper on multi-level mixture models, and this sits on our website as well. So this would be relevant, for instance, if you talk about the aggressive disruptive measurement instrument of 13 items, fall of first grade, spring of first grade, and you have a latent class variable in fall, latent class variable in spring. But then you have these filled circles, so signifying random means or random intercepts, varying across classrooms, where on the between level, again, these random intercepts or means are continuous latent variables. And Timur wrote about this and showed how one can talk about the influence of, in this case, classroom level of aggression. You know, like I said yesterday, a continuous latent variable on between a random intercept type can be thought of as an average, class average aggressive behavior, and that influences the categorical latent class variable on level 1 on the student level. It influences so the level of classroom aggression can influence each student's probability of being in a more aggressive class, having higher probabilities to endorse those items. Same thing for time point 2. And the aggressiveness level of the classroom at time 1 may influence the aggressive classroom level at time 2. You know, from fall to spring at least, most kids stay in the classroom, and the teacher is still struggling with those kids in the spring. So in that paper is described how you can decompose these effects. So you have C2 is influenced on the within level, influenced by C1. C1 is influenced by C number 1, the random intercept, which means that the random intercept has an indirect influence to C1 to C2. So C2, class membership for the student at time 2 in the spring, is influenced by the fall average classroom level aggression. It's an interesting thought. So where you started off, the environment that you started off in influences your behavior later on. But your behavior is also influenced by the classroom level of aggression at time 2 in the spring. So anyway, he tries to decompose these effects in percentages in this combination of categorical latent variables on level 1 and continuous latent variables on level 2. Just by way of saying that you can do two-level latent transition analysis in Mplus. Latent transition analysis is an area where we want to move forward further and make things both more general and more easy for you to work with. There's lots to be done there, and it's interesting to see what an increase in interest in both latent class and latent transition analysis that has occurred in the last couple of years. People are finding many substantive research questions that can be best answered by transition analysis. It used to be a technique that was only for the few. He lay there slumbering. It was a sleeper for many years. But I think now it's moving forward quickly. And it's easy to do here. You have cluster equals classroom. Categorical here are our, we actually dichotomized. In this case, we just simply dichotomized these aggressiveness items. You remember they were quite skewed. And we have, here's the first instance of having two latent class variables. Class variable for fall and a class variable for spring. That's the mixture statement of how many classes we're going to have. And we have two latent class variables here. And you don't have to have the same number of classes for them. And they are such that, so this is C fall, and this is C spring. If you look at this picture now on the right, for those of you who know about CFA, confirmatory factor analysis, you actually have now a confirmatory latent class model going on, as opposed to an exploratory. Why do I say that? Well, because the confirmatory says that the classes at time 1 do not directly influence the probabilities for the items at time 2. There are no arrows from here to here. Likewise, there are no arrows from here to here. So that's like zero factor loadings, right, in CFA. That's the idea. True, you could have exceptions to it. It is possible in Mplus to say that C1 influences not only the probabilities for the time 1 items, but also directly to the time 2 items. That's possible. Could happen. You think about the application of it. You could do that if you want to. But this is C-LCA or C-LTA. Well, LTA is a C-LCA, C being confirmatory. LTA is a C-LCA. That's hard to say. Anyway, so we do two-level mixture modeling. And it's useful to have at least two processes. Like I said, I work with a 4-processor computer right now and enjoying that. Can you see behind there? Maybe I should do a switch here. Again, we cannot change that podium, unfortunately. But you have then the within and between. And for each level, you have an overall, and potentially class-specific statements. But here there are none because they're defaulted. So in the overall within, you have CS on CF. That's this. C2 on C1. And on between, you have CS number 1. That's C2 number. Oh, let's see. CS number 1, yes, that's C2 number 1 on CF number 1, which is over here. So that's that regression. There is this regression. And then if you want the variances of these variables, they're continuous now on the classroom level. To activate the variances, you should mention them. And when we mention them, we just as a default, or as a standard approach, give starting values of 1. 1 is a good number. It's a lonely number, but it's a good one. All right. So then, if you can go from right to left. No, I don't think you can. Not at this point. Then you have a model CF and a model CS. So these are submodels, which then tells me I should have this up here. So you have a model CF, C for the fall, which is C1, and a model CS, which is C for the spring, which is C2. So you can break up the model like this when you have multiple latent class variables. So you have a between part for CF and a between part for CS. On the between, just like when we did multi-level growth modeling or multi-level regression, the means or mean related parameters end up on the between level, as they do in the standard multi-level fashion a la the Rodenbusch and Breich book. Means end up on the between level. You have to give them somewhere. You only have one set of means, but we tend to give them. We have chosen to give them on the between level. And so does the item probabilities, which are the parameters that are mean related in this case. So item probabilities, three analogous names: item probabilities, item intercepts, item thresholds. They all have to do with the same thing. In Mplus, we've chosen to work with thresholds, as we discussed before. Thresholds, as we learned in day 3 in March, are designed by $sign. And in this case, we have only one threshold for each item, $1, because the item is dichotomous. So if the item has C categories, you have C minus 1 thresholds. But more importantly, what are we doing here? We're saying that for the two classes, we give the thresholds and give them labels, item 1 through 9, and for class 2, parameter 1 through 9, and for class 2, parameter 11 through 19. And you notice then that you repeat those numbers here. So up here, for the fall, those measurement parameters are equal to the measurement parameters for the spring. So this is measurement invariance. That's specified. The measurement parameters having to do with the item probability profiles are the same in the fall and in the spring. So these numbers being the same here states that, holds them equal. Again, these are parameter labels, in this case numbers referring to the list of parameters, the list of thresholds given here. Very convenient. And that's measurement invariance, which is a hypothesis. You don't have to have it. You can relax this. You can get rid of these numbers, or get rid of some of them, and see if your model fits the data better. And that would be allowing for partial measurement invariance. But in any case, here we postulate measurement invariance, and that completes the model. That's all we have to do for that setup. The output then, you get CS on CF on the within level. That coefficient then, we have the usual, the 3 columns are estimates, standard errors, and the ratio, which is a z-score, approximately normal variable. And the 3.938, you have to know then what that is. It is a slope for a logistic regression. Slope for a logistic regression, because the dependent variable CS number 1 is a categorical latent variable, a dichotomous latent variable, regressed on another dichotomous latent variable. But the important thing is that the dependent variable is this dichotomous latent variable in the spring. So this is a logistic regression coefficient, and you can do your usual e to the power of to get odds instead of this log odds feature. But all we need to know is that if you are in the high aggressive class in the fall, you have a high probability, you have a higher probability, significantly higher probability of being in the high aggressive class in the spring. Now, you also have then on the between level then C number 1 is regressed on CF. So then we're down here, and when we go below the line to the between level, those variables are continuous. C number 1 on CF number 1 is a standard linear regression coefficient. It's significant. So if the classroom level of regression was high in the fall, then that tends to give a high regression level for the classroom in the spring. As in any linear regression, you get a residual variance for the spring. And it's barely significant, but there is a little bit more to explain there. So it's just to show you that every analysis you may want to do in a single level setting can be generalized to the multi-level setting.
Thank you.
And here comes Linda, which means I'm supposed to sit down.
Thank you. Okay, so now we're going to be looking at a multi-level growth mixture model. And we talked about growth mixture modeling in March and went into it in detail. And now what we want to do is just take it one step further and bring in the multi-level aspect to it. So on this screen, I'm showing the results of an analysis that we discussed thoroughly in March, and we're going to just talk about it in brief. So first of all, what is a growth mixture model, for those of you who don't know? It's a latent class model that is longitudinal rather than cross-sectional. So when Bengt talked about latent class analysis, that's a cross-sectional type of analysis. But now we're looking at longitudinal modeling. A growth mixture model looks at different trajectories of a growth model in different classes. So the hypothesis would be that you have a growth model and the trajectory differs for unobserved classes. It differs across time, and you want to understand that. So you're saying that you don't believe that all individuals in your sample have the same growth trajectory. You believe it may differ for different individuals based on some unobserved phenomenon. So not males and females, but something unobserved, something that's not measured. So we did an analysis for the LSAE math achievement items, and we tried to look, and we looked at the distal outcome, and we've been talking about that a little bit. Can we have something beyond? We looked at the distal outcome of high school dropout. And after lengthy analysis, we came up with the following results. We have 3 classes shown in the 3 plots, and those 3 classes were differed in where they started in their math achievement. The first class started very low, the second a little bit higher, and the third a little bit higher yet. And they have different growth rates. So the one that started lower has a slower growth rate. The higher class has a higher one. You can also see in the scatters that the lower class seems to have less variability around the mean growth curve than the others. So the solid line is the mean curve, and the lines around it are individual estimated, or individual observed curves. So we have these 3 classes, and the first one would represent poor development. That was 20% of the sample. The second one, moderate development, and the third one, good development. So we're really most interested in the class that has poor development because we'd want to be able to intervene and do something about people who are having problems. And as you can see, where I have dropout here on the slide, you can see that as a distal outcome, 69% of the people who had this poor development over grades 7 through 10, were never able to get out of it, just stayed down there. 69% actually dropped out versus only 8 and 1% of the other two classes. So this is the basic idea between with growth mixture modeling. So we're looking at these different classes that have different types of development and perhaps have therefore different relationships to the distal outcome. And this is one of the things that came up earlier. How do you decide on the number of classes? So besides looking at statistical tests to decide, you also look at whether it makes sense. So some type of a predictive validity. And you could be using the information that we see here with dropout rate as a sign of predictive validity of these classes. That it makes sense that people who have poor development in math achievement from grades 7 to 10 are going to drop out far more often than people who have moderate or good development. So what we want to do here is take this to the next level, to a two-level model. But first of all, let's look at the path diagram for the one-level model that we actually estimated. And that would just be on the top of this diagram, on the top of this slide. So for the within is what we actually looked at. So what do we have here? We have a set of covariates. We have our math score measured over time. We have the growth model, very familiar, that we looked at on Monday, with an intercept growth factor and a slope growth factor. We have high school dropout, regressed on all of those covariates. That's our distal outcome. And you note that it has a random intercept. It is a categorical variable. And C is the categorical latent variable that we've been talking about, the latent class variable. So it's pointing to high school dropout intercept, which means that this intercept is going to vary across classes, or the thresholds, rather, are going to vary across classes. And it's those thresholds varying across classes that we use to compute these probabilities in the slide on the left, on my left. And what else do we have? So we have the regression of the intercept or growth factors also on the covariates. We have the categorical latent variable, have the broken lines pointing to the regression of the growth factors and high school dropout on the covariates. And those broken lines means we're going to allow those to vary across classes. The default would be that they're going to be held equal across classes, but we want to let them vary. And the categorical latent variable pointing to SW and IW means that we're going to allow those random intercepts also to vary across classes. So when a categorical latent variable points to something, it means that that's going to vary across classes. And when it has the broken lines pointing to a line, then those are also going to vary across classes. And note that on the categorical latent variable circle, we have a solid filled-in circle, which represents that we have a random intercept. We will have a random intercept on the between level. But that's the basic model that we analyzed to get this information, to summarize into this information. So actually, if we had 3 classes, we should have 2 on that. So that's a mistake in the picture, I think, right? Right. Okay, so you should have actually 2 filled-in circles on that if you want to do that so you're not confused later. So let's see, what else can we say about this now? So, okay, so that's enough. So we have this on the within level, and now we extend it to the between level. And how do we interpret this? Well, high school dropout, the random intercept of high school dropout comes down here on the between level as a continuous latent variable. All of the math scores their random intercepts also come down here. Note that they each have a filled-in circle, so they come down. On the between level, we estimate an intercept-only model. So you'll see that we have IB, but we don't have IW. And we talked about that.
SB.
I'm sorry. But we don't have SB. So we have IB, but not SB. Because, as we mentioned yesterday, a lot of times there's a lot less variability on the between level. And so it was sufficient to have an intercept-only model, growth model on that. And then we have from our categorical latent variable, which has 3 classes, therefore 2 random intercepts, they both appear down on the between level also, C number 1 and C number 2. And we're regressing the random intercepts of the growth model and the 2 random intercepts for the categorical latent variable on the between level covariate lunch and the between level covariate, I can't see that there, oh, MSTRAT. And let's talk about what MSTRAT is for a minute. It's the ratio of students to teachers in the classroom. So the ratio of students to teachers in the classroom. And we also regress the random intercept of high school dropout on lunch, which is a proxy for poverty, and MSTRAT. So this is a complicated model, but it follows all of the rules that we've been looking at. Let me put it up over there. And let's take a look at the input. And we won't go over the things that we've gone over a lot. Let's see what's new, or what's noteworthy at least, that we have high school dropouts categorical. And so that means we have a dependent variable that's categorical. We want to remember that when we're interpreting the results. Classes 3, so we're naming the latent class variable C and saying it has 3 classes. We have a cluster variable, school code, so cluster is school. And now we're saying that certain variables are within variables only, which means they're measured on the individual level, but modeled on the within level, not the between level. So that's female mother's education. I think that's all of the covariates there. And then same thing with the between. We have lunch and MSTRAT. They're measured on the between level, and therefore they can only be used on the between level. A variable that is not mentioned on either the within or the between list, if it's measured on the within level, it will be used on both, modeled on both levels. Now the define command you really can ignore. Define is just a command that we use to transform variables, so we're just doing a rescaling here. But we have our analysis command where we're showing that we're going to do mixture 2-level missing. And because high school dropout is categorical, we need algorithm equals integration. And we have asking for a variety of output options and a variety of plots. So, and the plots we can use to create the plots that you saw earlier. So now we are going to talk about the model command. So we have to have a within part of the model command and a between part of the model command. And now that we're into mixture modeling, for both within and between, we have to have the overall and, if needed, the class-specific parts of the model. So here in the within, we just simply specify the growth model in the first statement. That we did a lot on Monday. And then we regress I and S on that set of covariates that's shown over there. And then with our C variable, with our categorical latent variable, it has 3 classes, so we need to refer to 2 of them, and we do that by saying C number 1, C number 2. We don't refer to the 3rd class because this is a multinomial logistic regression, and the 3rd class is the reference class. So we just say C number 1, C number 2 on, and we give the whole long list of covariates. And then to complete the model on the within, we say high school dropout on the full set of covariates once again. So we just go from the path diagram over here to the language. On is used to specify regressions. The bar is used to specify the growth model. Now, we have the class-specific model statements. So we refer to those by %C number 1 for class 1, %C number 2 for class 2, and %C number 3 for class 3. And what we're doing here is allowing the default for Mplus would be that the variances of Math 7 through Math 10 would be held equal across groups, and also the variances for I and S. And so we're just specifying them in each class-specific part of the model command so that they'll be free. And the same for I and S. We're also mentioning the IS on, the on statement for I and S and the covariates in 2 of the class-specific model commands, so they won't be held equal across groups. So in mixture modeling, a lot of times, a lot of the parameters, I think everything actually, except means, are held equal as the default across the classes. I don't mean to say groups as I did earlier, across the classes. And so it's always a good idea to run the model with the defaults first, and then to relax those equalities, not all at the same time, but in a stepwise fashion, just to make sure that it doesn't cause convergence problems. Sometimes it's hard to have certain parameters free across all the classes. And a lot of times that's especially the case for variances. So you can go, after you run an analysis, and look at the variability using the plot command of your variable within classes and see if they look like they are, if the variances are different. Like you have a class with really wide variability versus one with really small. And then you can relax the assumption of equal variances for just one of the classes, not necessarily all of them. So do it in a more of a thoughtful way rather than just freeing them all. So that's the within part of the model. And then we have to specify the model for the between part of the model. So once again, we do the growth model, and I mentioned we have an intercept-only growth model on the between, which means we just give one name on the left-hand side of the bar, and that's assumed to be the name of the intercept growth factor, and it's assumed that you're going to have an intercept-only model. You note that actually here we say Math 7 through Math 10 at 1. It's unnecessary to say the at 1 here. If you just give the names of the outcome variables, we automatically fix them to 1, their factor loadings to 1. And here we're fixing the IB at 0, which I don't know. I'll have to ask you why you did that.
Let's hold that aside.
Okay, that's not important.
Not right now.
Okay. All right. So anyway, and then we give also the regression IB on lunch and MStrat, the multinomial. Well, it's not a multinomial logistic regression on between because these are continuous variables, but we're regressing both of the random intercepts on lunch and MStrat, and high school dropout, once again, is no longer dichotomous, but it's a random intercept. So we're regressing 4 random intercepts on lunch and MStrat. And then we're giving a variety of starting values for thresholds. And as we've mentioned, thresholds are referred to at using the variable name, a $, and then the number of the threshold. So hopefully that's the end of the input. Thank God. That was a long input. But it's a complex model. So what can I say? So basically, we then get a summary of our data saying that we have 13 missing data patterns. We're adding in version 5 missing data in front of patterns, since sometimes when we look at it, we can't remember what kind of patterns we're talking about. And for both Y and U, the number of clusters, 44. So you can trust that we're still in the LSA data. And we did this yesterday, but maybe I should mention it for new people. We give the number of clusters of certain sizes. So the size is 12. That means there's 12 people in a cluster. And the cluster ID is 304 that has 12 people. So whatever the cluster variable was, school, in the data set, one cluster has 304 as a number, and that cluster has 12 people. And this output is no longer going to be given as the default. It's only going to be given with type equals basic, because we found that some people have so many clusters, and it's like you're paging through before you get to the results. You know, we finally decided that maybe that should not be the default. And then we get this message, which I get a lot of people who get this message and email me.
It looks scary.
Right. So it goes on and on and on, and then you get so scared you don't read the third part, which says the non-identification is most likely due to having more parameters than the number of clusters. Reduce the number of parameters. And if that message comes out, that's what that means. And as we mentioned in the last couple of days, if you have more parameters than clusters, we believe the results are trustworthy, but we have never done a study to prove that that's the case. Tiamir believes that, and I believe a lot in anything Tiamir believes in. So, so it's probably the case, but you know, like I said earlier when I mentioned that, it'd be a nice dissertation topic, and we'd love to know the answer for sure. So if anybody wants to choose that topic and needs a little guidance, we could maybe help them. But anyway, so don't get too overly alarmed about that. But you know, if you can keep your number of parameters lower than your number of clusters, that probably would be a good thing to do. And then we get our regular log likelihood and BICS, you know, which we're usually going to be using when we're trying to decide on the number of classes. So they're not of too much value just in and of themselves for a single analysis. Then we get our final class counts and proportions of total sample size based on estimated posterior probabilities. So you'll notice in class 1, there's 686.439 people. And for those of you who weren't here in March, you might wonder about that. But during model estimation, each individual is in each class proportionally. So that's why the number isn't an integer. But based on the estimated posterior probabilities, class 1 has 29% of the people, class 2 18%, and class 3 52%. So that's some new output that you haven't seen. And then we get our model results. So this is on the between level. So whenever you're looking at on statements or regressions, the first thing that you want to think about is what's the scale of my dependent variable, because that's going to tell me what kind of regression coefficient I have and therefore how to interpret it. So the first column is our parameter estimates, second standard errors, the third the ratio, which is the z-score that we look to for significance. So if we look, this is IB is it's continuous variable on between. It's the intercept of the intercept growth factor. It's the intercept growth factor. And we're regressing it on lunch, which is a poverty measure, and that's not significant, and MSTRAT, which is significant, and that's the ratio of students to teachers. So what we're finding is as the ratio of students to teachers increases, the intercept decreases. So, and the intercept of math, lower math means the school's doing worse. So what it's saying is that as there are more students per teacher, the students are doing more poorly on math. So do you agree with that? Okay. And then,
This is in class 1 on the page.
right, and this is in class 1. Okay, that's a good point. So we're looking at between level results for class 1. So we're going to be getting, we'll have results for all 3 classes, but I think we're only looking at them from class 1 because, as I said earlier, we're more interested in the failing class because that's the class that we want to understand why they're failing. When we regress the intercept for high school dropout on the 2 covariates, only lunch is significant. So that would say as poverty increases, because that's a proxy for poverty, high school dropout increases. And then we have non-significance there. So that's for the high school dropout class, class 1. Our intercepts are all fixed at 0. Oh, I must have missed this part of the model. The residual variances of mass 7, 8, 9, and 10, of the input, we fixed at 0 in the input. And the reason we did that is to be in line with most multi-level programs who don't estimate those parameters. But in Mplus, you could estimate those parameters and actually test if they are, in fact, 0. And I don't see anything else too exciting there. And then we get results for the within level. And you don't have the class on that? Is that just overall?
No, that's class 1.
Oh, where do you see C number 1?
That's the logistic.
Okay. So here on the within level, C number 1 is part of, let me just flip forward. You see C number 2. So C number 1 and C number 2 on those covariates are the results of a multinomial logistic regression. So those are taken together. So they represent that categorical latent variable being regressed on all of the covariates. And because it's a multinomial logistic regression, then we're going to be talking not about values, the increase in this is related to an increase in that, but rather probabilities and how likely something is. So what we can say here is that females, because this is negative, females are less likely to be in class 1 compared to class 3. So in the multinomial logistic regression, you always have a reference class. And let's see, what else is significant? Let's find, so dropout thoughts, and it's positive. So as dropout thoughts increase, you're more likely to be in class 1 versus class 3. So that's the way that you interpret the multinomial logistic regression coefficient. And also, whenever we're interpreting regression coefficients and there's more than one, of course it's controlling for the others. But you always need to remember that you're referencing it's class 1 in reference to class 3. So it's not just you're more likely to be in class 1, period. So that's class 1. And in class 2. And class 1, of course, is the class with the worst performance. Okay, and class 2, Banks says it's not important enough. I have my little voice behind me. This is kind of neat. It's like having a news person with a microphone in their ear saying, "You mispronounced that word." Go back. All right, so then on the between level, we have the random intercepts. So these are continuous now. They're down here. They're random intercepts. And we're regressing them on the poverty variable lunch and M-strat, the ratio of students. So nothing is significant for the random intercept for class 2, but for class 1, the poverty variable is. So as poverty increases, being in class 1 increases. So the intercept increases for class 1. So that's a lot of information, but it's hopefully can stimulate some of you to want to do this type of analysis and therefore study it, or maybe come next time we teach about latent class analysis and growth mixture modeling, so those days that we did in March, and then you'll have the look ahead to how to apply that to two-level modeling. But you definitely need to have studied growth mixture modeling, latent class analysis, if you're then going to go up to adding two-level to it, and to have studied two-level. Because if you don't know any of that, and you just try to run a model in Mplus, and then try to understand what you got out of it, you would be hard-pressed, I think, to do that. I would be hard-pressed to do that. And I think that must be the end of that. So, can you do one thing before we take questions and answers, or maybe we need to take questions and answers?
We should do that, but let me just say a few words.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I'd like to reiterate Linda's words that you really should study up on the papers behind all of these techniques. Using Mplus or reading the user's guide is not intended to substitute for that. The user's guide is a guide to using the program. It's not a guide to, it was not intended to be a guide to understand the methods. You should read the articles that are on our website, and hopefully one day we'll have a series of books to describe the models and the analysis purposes in detail. But this is an interesting example if you think through it here. You saw that poverty, if you just reiterate this for a while, poverty of the school was significantly influencing C1 here. And the C1, the class 1 is the failing class. So high poverty in the school creates a high random intercept for that school. And a high random intercept for that school, for that class, says that the student in that school is more likely to be in the failing class, irrespective of the individual characteristics. So poverty has an impact on the probability of being in the failing class, which then, being in the failing class, influences math performance, and being in the failing class influences high school dropout as well. So it's an interesting indirect effect of lunch here. Indirect effect, lunch goes to here significantly, and since that sits here, it influences the math growth, and since that influences high school dropout, it influences high school dropout also on the individual level. So the poverty is a pretty powerful predictor. Also, the X variables on the within level, there were several significant ones influencing C1, which is the probability of being in a failing class, and probability of the failing class influences high school dropout. So there again, you have a mediator being a math developmental class, and those get disengaged from school and perform poorly in a demanding subject are more likely to drop out eventually. So you have C mediating, X influencing the distal high school dropout. And then on the between level here, again we had C number 1 being influenced by lunch significantly. So, wait, didn't we just look at that?
No, that was within, I think. Wait, back up.
This is, let's see.
That's within.
Okay. I went the wrong way here. We just looked at this one. We had this between level. This is where I wanted to go. Slide 48. So on the between level here, lunch had no significance for IB. So lunch was not important for the growth factor IB per se, but that is the school level variation within C here, within the school. Sorry, the school. Let me say if I can say that right. So, how did you say it, Linda? As MSTRAT
increases,
as MSTRAT increases,
decreases.
The intercept increases. So the quality, yeah. So as the quality of teaching decreases,
right. The intercept increases.
As the quality of teaching increases, the intercept decreases.
Right.
As the quality of teaching increases, the
intercept goes down, which is
okay,
bad.
so this is a little funny because MSTRAT is the poor quality of teaching. As the number of students per teacher increases,
right.
the intercept decreases, which is in the expected direction.
Exactly.
So here you see the quality of teaching having an impact on the math development as well. Now for high school dropout, here you see a direct effect of lunch onto the between level part of high school dropout. So lunch had that direct influence as well. Not only the influence this way and over here, but the direct influence on the intercept for high school dropout. So the poverty seems to be quite, index seems to be quite powerful, but the teaching non-quality
Right.
seems to have an impact on the achievement at least. So there are two kinds of variables operating differently there. That's why we chose them, to sort of get a story out of that. So with that, we are set up well for the afternoon, talking about between-level classes and being able to talk about some exciting new development in Mplus version 5. Some of them. There are many more that we don't cover.
So maybe we should start taking questions since it's almost 12.
Yeah.
Yes.
On slide 50, you mentioned that we're comparing these results to the probability of being in class 1 to the reference class 3, but I was wondering if there's any way to decide which class gets to be the reference class, because when it looks like when you're doing this analysis, the analysis is figuring out which classes are which at the same time.
There's two ways to do that. Now, first of all, we give the results with all reference classes, or each reference class. So we'll give 3 as the reference class, 2 as the reference class 1. So we give you those results. If you wanted to, you could also use starting values to make the last class, which is the reference class, the class you want it to be. So like, let's say you have class 1, class 2, class 3. You want 1 to be the reference class. You use the estimates for model 1, the starting values for model 3, and a subsequent analysis. Model 1 becomes model 3. Model 3 becomes either model 1 or model 2, and you get the right reference class. But in most instances, we give it in all.
Okay, lady back there. Yeah.
47, slide 47.
47.
That counts and percentages for the classes, are they observed? Well, I suppose they are predicted. And I wonder why are those counts are not have decimal places?
Why are those counts not?
Have decimal places instead of in numbers.
Maybe you should repeat that. Or no.
You're saying why do these counts have decimal places? Yeah, I think Linda explained that as a person being potentially a partial member of more than one class in the estimation. Although the model says the prior, so to speak, the model says that a person is in one or only one class. In the computations, a person is distributed fractionally across the different classes. So that's why you end up with decimals. Now you can also, this is based on the posterior probabilities, and this is as estimated by the model. But you can also, in the output you get the persons who are most likely to be in a class. And then you wouldn't have any decimals.
Can we save those without like predicted membership?
Can you save them? Yes.
Can you save those predicted memberships? Yes, you can.
Yes,
yeah.
but let's just say, though, that you would not want to use the most likely class membership in a subsequent analysis, for example, as a grouping variable or something like that, to look at differences in parameters across classes, because that would introduce an estimation error. Instead, if you want to look at differences in classes for a certain variable, do it within the latent class framework.
So do C on X, for example, or distal on C.
Or just compare the means across classes.
So in an exploratory fashion, you can do crosstabs between class membership and other variables. But if you're going to do inference, significantly different, those inferences will be wrong. And that's a common mistake in the literature right now, because you're acting as if class membership is observed, whereas it is derived as a latent variable, and you also force a person to be a member of only one class. So you get biases in the estimates and some errors.
So just in general, if you can do an analysis in one step, don't do it in 2 steps. Because mostly when you do an analysis in 2 steps, you introduce error along the way.
One other little detail here, note that the first class gets a percentage 29%, and in the single level analysis it was 20%.
Right.
So doing it better gives slightly different results.
Oh, but like,
Go ahead.
Empirically, how do we interpret that? I mean, for one person to be, could possibly be in 2 groups.
No, you don't. You don't. That's just, you should think of that as a computational device.
It's
a person is a member of
estimation
one and only one class, but you should just look at 29% is estimated to belong to class 1. If there is another model, if you're interested in a person potentially belonging to more than one class, There is a grade of membership model that you might want to consider, which can also be done in Mplus. Gone.
Way back there.
This is a follow-up to that as well. I mean, if we look at slide
Can you speak a little bit louder?
slide 37,
Okay.
it's the same issue that we're talking about of the difference between taking this out and doing it like in the crosstabs way of, you know, comparing something and then being able to say, here, we are kind of doing that, but you're saying we're integrating this in a different way with the high school dropout?
No. In this, the information from this was taken from a single model estimation. High school dropout was a distal outcome in that analysis. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, exactly. So as long as it's integrated in the same...
Right.
It was part of one and the same model, yeah.
Yeah. So, but if you had instead done the model without high school dropout, saved your latent class membership, most likely class membership variable, and then looked at how many people are in each of those, that would not be correct.
Right. Because that's tempting to just say the same thing, but that's...
Bad temptation.
Right.
But it's okay to do for exploratory purposes, but not for inferential purposes.
Yes.
Building on that, the code that goes with that on
41?
41, I didn't see where with high school dropout was addressed on the class.
Oh, okay.
So I didn't know if that was embedded somewhere in another piece.
No, that, in that situation,
It's here.
well, high school dropouts regressed on, but are you talking about the C?
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Oh, I see.
when the C points to that, it means it varies over the classes, and it's just the threshold varying over the classes. That line means that the thresholds vary over the classes.
Well, you actually have it on slide 42, I think.
Oh, 42. Right.
No, the next one, actually. 43, sorry.
That's okay. Oh, yeah. So here. So here's class 1, class 2, class 3, and here's the threshold of high school dropout.
So you don't, essentially you do not say U on the C, but you let the U threshold or probabilities vary. This is actually default here, so you don't even have to say it.
But it's defined in the between part of the model.
Right, all the level-related parameters appear on
actually,
the between.
That's not correct. That part should be on the within. That's
Well,
not correct.
well, no, it's not. But,
Oh, no, you're right. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
My brain's gone.
Day 3. No, it is, any level-related parameter ends up on between to be in line with standard multi-level modeling.
So any threshold, intercept, mean. I mean, you can't believe how long we debated where to put those and how we argued in our office.
You
about
can't
that.
believe how complex the software is in this
And after
area.
we finally put it on between like everyone else, and I said, it shouldn't be on either level. It should just be on its own level. Oh, well, enough. It's going to be on between.
We have a
forever.
question over here.
So on the input, I was wondering why on slide
42.
so why the regression of bias on the covariance weighted for number 2
So these. So why is it not up here? Because you could put it up there, but if you put it in 2 of 3 places, the third one is free. Just because if class 3 is different from class 2, then one is going to be different.
So it's just saying that they're class specific, and since we have it defined in the overall, the first class will also
Class 1
be.
will get the overalls.
Yeah, so it was just shortcut, which was unpedagogical, and you apologize. You picked them up.
Okay. I'm thinking about, especially with 38, slide 38, if you presume that there's a process that co-varies with math achievement that might be more proximal or more important for predicting high school dropouts, say you look at like childhood aggression or classroom level aggression, you just talk about how that would fit into the structural model that you have.
So you want to have another process sitting somewhere here.
That would co-vary with the math
So
achievement.
co-varies with, so parallel process with math, and that's perhaps more proximal to the distant high school dropout. Yeah, that would be, you could do parallel process growth mixture modeling. And
I mean, if it's concurrent, so say you have aggression, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th grade.
yeah,
So
you,
then
you would
have
just,
it as a
I mean, as
parallel.
long as you have the power to do it, you can.
yeah, that's right. As long as you have the power to do it. So you would just then correlate the growth factors for the two processes like we talked about yesterday, or was it Monday?
I think it was Monday.
And so growth mixture modeling can be done with parallel processes and two-level versions of that as well. Yeah.
So basically, we give you a lot of building blocks, and you can put them together in any way that you think. The models aren't limited by what's in the user's guide or what we present when we teach. You might have an idea of something that is specifically good for you. So you can add all kinds of other things to that.
So it's the combinations that's the strength of Mplus. The team tried to be really careful to allow all kinds of combinations. Linda doesn't like any holes in the cross-tab table of all the possibilities. But that means that you have the options of combining these features.
Yes?
I was just wondering, the starting values that you have on slide 42, where did you get those? You ran it first with one of the other ones being the omitted category, and that's how you got the starting value?
My best guess would be that when Bengt ran this, he then, it probably took a while or something, and then he was making modifications to the model, so he probably took starting values from an early model to put them into this model, and so as he made modifications, it would go faster. Does that sound right?
That sounds right.
So as a very first step, though, how would you run it with no starting values?
First
Yeah,
step,
no
I
starting
would not
values.
use starting values. I mean, I see people using starting values a lot when they send things to me on support. And it's sort of an old-fashioned thing to do. I know in the very early days it was important in SEM and stuff, and people do it. But I would go without starting values, because sometimes you can give bad ones and make it worse for yourself. Yeah, if you have no idea, let the defaults go for you. But then if you have something that does take a long time, you could use starting values to speed it up, but not as a first step. And like Bengt found that, the unperturbed model was the best model, so then he set starts equals 0 to speed things up. So there's things you can learn as
And
you
just
go
for those of
along.
you who haven't gone into mixture modeling yet, you have then the possibility of finding multiple solutions, a likelihood that has several maxima you have to choose, and the way to choose the right one, the highest peak of the mountain, is to use many, many different starting values. And the program does that automatically using the random starts feature, so which makes the any default starting point less relevant, because the program will try a lot of different ones and then finding the best likelihood. And again, then in mixture modeling, the best likelihood, you want that best likelihood, the highest likelihood value, to be replicated several times to be more to be able to depend more on that solution being the right one.
Right, so to make sure you haven't hit a local solution.
Yes, that one.
Yeah.
This case goes to slide 34 and 43.
32 and 43?
34 and
34?
I guess you mentioned a little bit earlier why we have to put the
Equalities?
yes into not equalities, but on the percent CF number 1, and you put the category of those indicators in between level instead of within level.
Right. So again, we see thresholds as a level-related parameter in between.
In between.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure, but when I look at the slide 38,
38?
38?
It's to me intuitively it is modeled in within level.
Yeah, very, very perceptive, and that gives me reason then to get back to the question that I asked Linda to circumvent. Why IB was fixed at 0 for.
Right.
So that's 39 probably. So now we're talking high tech here, folks.
43.
Let me just remind myself of
No,
something.
you're looking for out. Oh. Wait, I'll
Yeah,
look.
so the latent class variable C is within the latent class variable. And let me see.
42.
Yeah, I know. So on the within level, we talk about I and S. On the between level, we talk about IB. So this is really IW and SW in terms of the picture. One of these days we'll sort this out. But so in this case, we want to have two growth factors, but only one of them has only the intercept has cross-school variation. But at the same time, we want to allow for means to change across classes for both I and S. And in fact, in this case, it doesn't matter if you say that IW and SW has the means, or if IB and SB has the means. It doesn't matter. It's the same growth model. In general, it's the same growth model. So you can put the means on either level, but you can't put them on both. So that's why we put them on the within level and fix the mean of IB on the between level to 0. So here you see these are the means for the growth factors on the within level latent class variable varying. But then when you get to the between level, you can't identify the mean there as well, so we fix it to 0. It will be non-identified if we put it there. But that's a very good question. And that came up just because we only had IB, not SB on between. If we had both of them on between, I could have put the means on the between, and it would have been more pedagogical for this first time. But that's why I did it. So you could put the, in that case, you could put the means on either level in general. You pick them.
Yes.
On slide 33, what does the cut statement mean?
Oh, the cut statement, that's just a special part of define. It's just an option that allows you to create categorical variables from continuous variables. So it just creates a variable that goes from 0 to 1.5, and I think it's 1.6 to whatever.
Well, actually, in this case, the variable range from score range from 1 through 6, and we just dichotomize it as 1 or greater than 1.